Hi, I'm Ken Rigel from the Ken Rigel Group, and this is Trung Bien from the Trung Bien real estate team. And today we want to talk about the blanket rezoning, which is about to go to vote in Calgary that could drastically change the makeup of neighborhoods across the city. Now, Trung, you do a ton of inner city neighborhood work. You do some development. You're really versed on this subject, so I really wanted to get your opinion on it. First of all, tell us a little bit about, what you know about the rezoning and what it could mean for neighborhoods.
On April 22nd, there's a vote coming to council that would generally say that every single lot or house in this community or in the city is going to be rezoned to RCG or HCO, which will allow for low density townhouse development. So communities that are typically R1, such as Varsity, Edgemont, Willow Park, Lake Bonavista, Vista, that only allows single family development, will now be permitted to build a townhouse.
And so and it's every neighborhood, right? Like it's not just like inner city, which is typically been where this redevelopment happens, like the Killarneys of the world and the Altadores and West Hillhurst and places like that. It's everywhere, isn't it?
It'd be every community. Yeah, blanket
So
rezoning.
So then basically, if we had a community of single family homes and on a street, you could have, 10 single family homes there. And all of a sudden you could have a fourplex or a sixplex or something like that, right?
Fourplex with basement suites. So it could
Wow.
be 8 units on a lot size of 50 by 120.
Wild. What's your take on it? Like, how do you feel about it? Like, just give me your opinion on it.
My thoughts is that I've never heard a consumer or a member of the public be excited about this zoning. I think the only people that are excited or watching it really, really closely are the ones that are going to profit from it, such as the builders, the real estate investors, the realtors that would sell these lots, and also the lenders that would make a lending fee from the purchase and the acquisition and the financing of these projects.
Totally. Totally.
So, but most people in the community don't want it in their backyard. Many people support more housing, more development, but they have a NIMBY approach, which is not in my backyard. So,
Right. Right.
as long as it's not happening around their street or on their block, they're okay with it. But if it's happening to the house across the street from them, to their neighbor's house, that's when they're not okay with it.
I want to talk a little bit more too about how this is going to affect communities across the city. And you actually told me something I didn't realize, because to me, I think, well, why are we doing this blanket rezoning? Why aren't we doing a phased approach and see if we can't take something that's not so drastic and just sort of inch our way into this just to see if we can't solve this housing crisis, without doing something so drastic. But you mentioned that there's a whole pile of money on the line here for the city if they don't do a blanket rezoning.
The federal government has the Housing Accelerator Act or fund. And my understanding is that Calgary has an opportunity to get 220 million in funding in stages. And one of the big milestones is that the city has to be blanket rezoned. So there's a little bit of a bribe to the politicians that you can get up to 220 million in funding, but one of the requirements is that the entire city gets rezoned to RCG or HCO.
Okay, that seems messed to me. Like honestly, it seems messed up to me. It seems like
Politics. Yeah.
we're sacrificing the sake of our neighborhoods, and we're sacrificing the city as we know it now and how the city has been master planned. Because you got to think about this too. Talk about developers in new communities. They have to have a master plan. They have to have a certain amount of green space. They have to have a certain amount of walking paths. They have to have, a certain number of people per hectare of land. Like all of these rules that you have to build a master plan community. So it just appears to me the city's now throwing all of these rules out the door just to get some cash.
They would throw the rules of zoning out the door, which speeds up the development process by 6 months and saves on fees. But there's also a theory that even with blanket rezoning, how many more building permits will be issued, because they also have to follow certain rules when it comes to the development. So what I've read and observed in other cities that have done this blanket rezoning is that the thought was that there was going to lead to an increase in developments and housing starts, but not as much as people thought, because they had to abide by tight building rules, and then also the economics of it had to make sense as well, right? So, well, the economics make sense in building in certain communities where it was typically R1, to be seen. But even with the blanket rezoning, it's not a sure thing that we'll see more housing starts. That's the hope for the sake of the local government. But in other cities that we've seen this in the States, or articles that I've read, it didn't actually lead to more building permits.
Okay. Okay. And so my thought on this too is been okay. Well, and I mentioned earlier that I would like to see sort of a phased in approach. My take is there's always communities that have properties that are of lesser value, and for the longest time, inner city on busy road corner lots were like the worst lot you could buy. Land value was terrible. Well, all of a sudden, those have become extremely valuable over the past few years because of the ability to build 4 and 5 plexes on them. So we've created a massive increase in land value for those certain lots. We could do the same thing for any home that's, say, on a busy road. I would like to see us start with traffic counts, number one. So if you've got, let's take 17th Avenue Southwest, for example, on the west side of town, between 37th Street and the Sarcee Trail. There's a lot of homes along that road that have typically been completely depressed in value compared to the expensive homes that are inside of those communities, like the Glendales of the world and the Glenbrooks and the Westgates and the Wildwoods and places like that. Those perimeter houses have been depressed. But if we take by traffic count all of these homes that are on these busier roads and we rezone those areas first, all of a sudden we will increase the value of those neighborhoods while not affecting the value of the interior homes that are in those neighborhoods. Does that make sense?
It totally does. What makes it even more interesting is that those homes were recognized as depressed in value, and then suddenly they got rezoned through applications or from a program called the Main Streets Development, and suddenly those became the highest sought after lots from developers, and they were worth more than the R1 lots in those communities.
In some communities, yeah, but the zoning was MCG, was it not, or MC1 that they went to? Was that not the zoning that those places?
RCG.
RCG, that's right, RCG.
Yeah.
So they
Mhm.
it wasn't as you weren't allowed to build as much density as you will with the new zoning, like you've got the language. What is it? It's Argo and what's
HGO. HGO.
HGO? Okay.
Yeah. So what's happening now with the blanket rezoning is that if it takes place with that vote on April 22nd, then all lots will be RCG.
Yeah, and see, I also think too, there's a lot of land in these communities that could be repurposed. Like down the street from me is a city park that nobody ever uses, and it's a huge piece of land. And we've got lots of green space in our neighborhood. So if a neighborhood had a certain percentage of green space, you could take some of these park areas or some of these, say, schoolyards that are underpopulated, and you could repurpose that land first and create more of a community hub inside some of these older communities, some of these older inner city communities, by taking that land and maybe building a 5-story structure on the land. You could still have some component of education within that building, but you could put in restaurants and coffee shops and condos and that sort of thing to create more of a community hub within the community before we do this blanket rezoning and affect the entire neighborhood. I just think that there's opportunities in other places first before we take this whole just throw the baby out with the bathwater approach myself.
Pretty innovative idea for sure. I think the thing that's driving a lot of the decisions is that if it's not blanket rezoning in the entire city, the municipal government's not going to get the funding of 220 million, which is crazy.
Yeah,
it's crazy how the world works.
Yeah, and like you look at certain neighborhoods in this city too that were municipalities before the city absorbed them and had to accept or adopt the current zoning laws of the time. Like I look at a neighborhood like Bankview, right? You look at Bankview, and that neighborhood is a mishmash. You've got $2-3 million homes beside derelict crack shacks, beside 5-story and 8-story rental towers, like just scattered throughout the neighborhood. There really is no rhyme or reason to the zoning in that neighborhood just because it was its own municipality before Calgary took over. My fear is that our neighborhoods are going to turn out like that all over the city.
The hope is that there will be construction guidelines that even though it's a townhouse, it still complements the current streetscape. So even though that there's a townhouse right beside you that has more density, hopefully it matches the building heights of the existing homes on the street.
Okay. Okay. So there is going to be that. There will be those restrictions on height and setback and things like that.
Definitely.
Okay. Trung Bien from the Trung Bien real estate team. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'm Ken from the Ken Rigel Group, and thanks for watching.